beautiful story, and I am so glad it had such a happy ending. Now, for those of you who don't know, Gary is our sounds effects engineer for the show, and his wife Sandy, well, she's always just right there in the audience. So let's give her
You know, that war touched so many of us, tech, crew, audience members, and cast members.
It sure did, and I have my own story about the war. The Army liked to take my husband, and I was left with the little ones. The second time Rick was in Vietnam, Ashford was just a toddler. We couldn't wait to get home every day to see if the mailman had brought a letter. And I would say, "Come on, Ashford, let's go see if Daddy has a letter for us." And we'd get so happy if there was one.
Yay, we got a letter from Daddy.
We'd get a letter from the mailman pretty regularly. Rick was really good about writing, so every week it would be the same thing, and I would say, "Ashford, come on, let's go see if we have a letter from Daddy." Then one day, Ashford was waiting by the window and got excited.
Here comes Daddy. Maybe he has a letter for us.
I looked. It was the mailman.
Mama, how come Daddy only brings us letters but never stays?
Then it dawned on me. I kept saying, "Let's see if we have a letter from Daddy." Ashford thought the mailman was his daddy.
I want to tell you what happened to my brother. He got his draft notice, he'd just gotten out of high school, and he barely made it out of school because of his accident on the farm. You see, a horse had fallen on him and crushed his leg. They had to put a plate in his ankle and his leg, and he was in a cast most of the last part of the year. A month before he reported in, he got his cast off. His leg was still pretty swollen.
They won't take me like this, will they?
Surely not. You're 4F if I ever saw one. Just tell them about your leg.
I will, don't worry.
Well, he reported in for his physical and told the doctor about his leg.
"You farm boys will do anything to get out." "Well, mister, let me tell you something that's not working with me."
Needless to say, he passed his physical, despite a crushed leg, and was sent to report to San Diego. He'd been on the train 36 hours by the time he got there. He was ready to rest his leg. When he got to his barracks, he listened as the quartermaster named each thing they laid out. Their number 8s, brogans, and skivvies. They lined up at the front of their bunks and were told to answer aye aye to everything. They all headed to the chow line, and he limped his way there. He heard the chief yell at him.
"Straighten up, Yardbird. You're making the whole crew look bad without even trying."
My brother Jack bit his cheek against the pain. The next day, they had them boys marching, and Jack fell out of step. He got cursed again.
Are you just naturally lazy and slow? We'll train that out of you. Everyone gets an extra 5 miles before chow tonight.
None of his crewmates wanted to be seen near him, as he'd been picked out to be a troublemaker. Jack was just trying his best. The next day, they were to stand at attention in the heat. Jack's leg was swelled up nearly twice its size, and he had to keep his laces loose just to fit his shoes on. Standing in formation, the world started to go black. Jack woke up with a medic holding ammonias under his nose.
"Did the heat get to you? I've seen it take down bigger men than you, don't worry."
No, it's my leg.
The medic looked at his leg, and it was black and blue and swollen out of shape.
"Good grief, man. What happened?"
Jack explained it'd been crushed, operated on, and in a cast for the past year.
"And you passed a physical like this?"
About this time, the chief came in. He was a virtual artist painting his speech with nothing other than 4-letter words. When the medic explained the situation, the chief was furious.
"I want this man out of the Navy, out of my sight, now."
My brother, who was now in need of surgery again because of what he'd been through, had to sign papers. First, that he wasn't in long enough to be considered as having served, so he would not receive benefits. It was like being a knoll from the Navy. sign a paper saying he falsified his records by not disclosing he had an injury or a condition that would keep him from serving his duty. He signed a few more, and then, just like that, he was out. He came back home, his leg healed, and he went back to farming. I'm just grateful to that medic who finally saw what Jack was going through.
I was a medic. I arrived January of 1970. I had my training and a bag of supplies to carry with me everywhere. I'd been in some fistfights. I was steeled up for what I had to do. I even got a little cavalier about it. We were training with new lighter tanks that didn't seem too bad. Then we were making our way from one position to another. The truck in front of us blew up. Bodies were flying everywhere. Nothing hit me like this incident. Like I said, I was used to firefights. But the booby traps, you never get used to those. You never know where they're going to be. You never know if the next step or the next bend in the road is going to be a mine or a bamboo spike in a pit. It blew up in front of my eyes. I ran to help the men who were on the truck. A couple of guys tried to hold me back in case of another mine, but I didn't care. All I was focused on was trying to help those screaming men. But in a minute or so, there was only one left screaming. There wasn't anything I could do for the other guys, but I worked on this one. I did everything I could, everything I knew how to do. But it wasn't enough. There wasn't enough in my bag to do what needed to be done. I worked on him for half an hour after he died, throwing punches at anyone who tried to pull me away. I finally walked away, over in some elephant grass. I don't know for how long. That was 1970, the last time I ever cried.
I hardly knew where I was. I'd never been out of the area. I was out of place. From Boone's Creek, I took basic at Fort Jackson for 8 weeks, and an additional 8 weeks for advanced infantry training. After that, I packed up and went to Vietnam. I guess they figured 16 weeks is enough to get you ready for war, at least if you were infantry. In Vietnam, there was no front. Everywhere was the front. If you were in Vietnam, you were on the front. I got there to the South China Sea. They issued us our duds and our weapons, and immediately we got into the nitty-gritty. Started doing search and destroy missions, combat assaults, and such things. Some people talked about what they were going to do when they got out. Made all kinds of plans. Not me. If you're infantry, you're just cannon fodder. They just use you to get the job done. I didn't make any future plans. I didn't use that time to think about what I was going to do when or if I got out. I kept my head in the game so I could get out. I made it. Some buddies of mine didn't. I tell you what, I grew up in Vietnam.
Daddy had just gotten back from his second tour in Vietnam. I was 5. We were out shopping at the commissary at Fort Eustis, near Patrick Henry Airport, not far from Langley Air Force Base. So, lots of air traffic. We were walking to our station wagon and a plane overhead breaks the sound barrier. Boom! Being near the airfield, my mom and I are used to it. We jump, but then laugh. But this is Daddy's second day back from the war. He was carrying a bag of groceries. We'd gotten fixings for hot dogs and hamburgers. Well, my dad hears the boom, tosses the bag to the ground, and dives across the parking lot into a truck. Everything in the bag splatters everywhere. My dad is laying belly down on the ground, shielding his head with his arms, yelling, "Who's hit? Who's hit?" My mom goes over to him and then starts rocking him back and forth like a baby. I just remember standing in the parking lot looking at this. Other soldiers coming out of the commissary, passing by while all this was happening. The thing I remember the most is that I was the only one surprised. I had nightmares. I knew the world had monsters. I knew something spooked my father, at least, and if it could scare him, it must be pretty awful. I drew pictures of what this boogeyman might look like. Long-nosed demons, wolf men with blood on their teeth, creatures of fire and smoke circling around them. And then one day I found a picture in the trash can from when my dad was in Vietnam. His first sergeant had sent it to him. It was a soldier, his buddy, wearing a necklace made of ears. I don't have to draw pictures anymore. I know what the boogeyman looks like.